Hey folks, it's that time of the week again. It's time for SysAdmin Weekly. And this week we are answering the question, what makes a good sysadmin? Now, over the years, I've heard many definitions of the term sysadmin. Typically, I think the most common one I've come across is, that administrator that takes care of servers, storage, and networking. But I've also heard people say that if it plugs into the wall, it's the sysadmin's responsibility, right? And so, as you're going about your day-to-day, you have all these different responsibilities, you have all these soft skills you have to learn, and it begs the question, what makes a good sysadmin? Because it's not just the technical skills, it's not just the soft skills, there's a mindset, there's some traits that really help you become the best sysadmin you can be. And so I've got Paul Schnackenburg on the show today, and we're gonna be answering this question, what makes a great sysadmin? So we've got that and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. New week. That means it's time for SysAdmin Weekly, the show by sysadmins for sysadmins and, well, really dedicated to all those tireless tech folks that are sweating and toiling away in the trenches, keeping our digital world spinning. I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got Paul Schnackenburg with me today. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. I think this is show number 3 for you. Episode number 3 of this show. I guess I need to use proper terminology, but always good to have you, my friend. We have good discussions, and I always value your insights.
Likewise. We have a very different background, but it's good to hear how other people have handled things. Helps us all.
It does indeed. It does indeed. And I think that ties in nicely with today's topic. So before we get to our weekly regular segments in our intro, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a teaser about what we're talking about today. And today we are answering the question of what makes a great sysadmin, right? And so that's the question. We're going to answer that in today's episode. But before we get to that, we have our 2 regular segments on the show. I guess we'll start with our news react segment. And, what the heck, Paul? I always go first. So I'm going to let you go first on this one for a change.
Oh, okay.
So you're in the hot seat.
Thanks. So I'm a regular subscriber to 404 Media. They're a journalist-founded news outlet that has been gaining some prominence over the last year. And they do a lot of cybersecurity-related stuff and how IT interacts with the rest of society. One of their recent articles and the podcast, they talked about Flock, which is a company that sells license plate reading cameras, and they sell those nationwide in the US. So they don't just sell them to police, right? They come into a town and say, hey, you could buy our cameras, and then the police can have access to that information. They also sell them to homeowners organizations, those sorts of whoever wants to put up one of these cameras or a set of these cameras. And that all sounds fine until you start digging into that. Underneath all of this, you can then opt in to have your data shared nationwide. And what that then means is that a police in Texas, for example, that is trying to track down a woman that is had an abortion outside of Texas can now track her car Australia-wide. US-wide. I'm in Australia. This is a US problem. It's an early morning here in Australia.
No worries.
And then the company selling this is also spruiking a new tool that they call Nova, where they're combining this information from the license plate readers with open source data leak information. So they're literally mining data leaks and putting it together, right? So that now you can put in, as a police officer or whoever, you could put in a number plate, and now not only do you know where that car has been, wherever it's gone in the US, you also know where that person lives. And if they've been in any data breaches, you might have even more information about them. So that's a pretty terrifying situation, really, I think. I wouldn't like that to happen here in Australia, but we tend to follow you guys, but just a few years later, in all the stupid stuff. So I'm sure we're going to do stupid stuff over here.
I hope not. I really hope not, because I don't agree with this either. And being a security guy, I tend to be pro privacy as well. And it's, everyone's like, well, what do you have to hide, Andy? Nothing. My thing with privacy is like, you give a little bit and it becomes a very slippery slope very quickly. And we have a saying over here. I don't know if I'm sure it translates, you give an inch, they take a mile, right?
Mhm.
And
That,
so that's how I've always felt about privacy. And those cameras, they are very common over here.
yeah,
So you'll see them at some intersections. You will see them. Uh, Last time I went to Chicago, so they used to have toll booths all along this big highway outside of Chicago. And you'd have to stop every, I don't know, 7 or 8 miles and, throw your change at somebody and they'd let you through. Well, the last time I went through, all the toll booths are gone, but
mhm.
now they have these license plate reading cameras. And after you've, made your trip and you've gotten back home, you have to log into a website and say, okay, I entered at this spot and I exited at this spot, and you have to pay your fee online. Seems convenient, but to your point, yes, that could be used for ill intent by law enforcement or bad actors as well. And you mention pairing this with data from data dumps. This is not my news item for the day, but I do remember coming across a headline recently about how there was some sort of security incident at LexisNexis,
Mhm.
which is a data
Mhm.
broker, right?
Mhm.
And so I, I don't like data brokers either, because they gather up all this data unbeknownst to us, Americans and other people in the world, and then they get hacked and it gets leaked and it's a whole thing. This is probably a whole podcast episode in and of itself.
It definitely is. Two quick notes. First of all, often people say, "Oh, but those cameras are for red light, people going through red lights or speeding." They're not. They're not used for that. That's not what they're for. They're literally just tracking movements of cars.
Yep.
And the second thing I think people need to realize about privacy is that when you think about privacy from your point of view as an individual, you tend to think of, oh, well, I told this company this thing and this company this thing, right? If you even think about it. But the
Right.
problem isn't that, it's the aggregation, right?
Yep.
Like each individual piece of thing is something that you could say, oh, well, I don't have anything to hide. But if you put it all together, you end up in a very, very, very scary situation, because you can analyze all that data in aggregate. And that's the big risk, I think.
For sure. And now you can build profiles of people based on all that aggregate information. Yeah, there's a whole episode here we need to talk
I,
about,
I think
because
so. I think
I
so.
would have to I would have to get up on my my anti-Google soapbox, and I don't have time for that in this
No,
episode. So
I can feel there's definitely another episode in here. I think we'll leave this one now, but we come back to it. I think privacy is
sure.
important.
Well, the news item that caught my eye, and my official news item for this episode, was news that the Hacker News broke on May 30th. I don't know if they broke the news, but they reported on it on May 30th. And the fact that ConnectWise was hit by a suspected nation state attacker. And they, quote, are on the record as saying, ConnectWise recently learned of suspicious activity within our environment that we believe was tied to a sophisticated nation-state actor which affected a very small number of Screen Connect customers. And of course, this is typical, breach speak for large businesses. A small number of affected customers.
Uh-huh.
Never actually say what the number is, right? And so what makes this so interesting is this. It's not confirmed, but back in late April, CVE 2025-3935 came out with a CVSS score of 8.1 for Screen Connect. So there's some folks in the security industry that are wondering if, like, okay, is there correlation here? We don't have the full story yet, but if you use ConnectWise. Most likely you're an MSP or something of, some sort of services company, or maybe you're an organization that uses Screen Connect within your business. Just something to have your eye on, right? No actions to be taken yet from what I've seen, but something to be aware of. So anyway, on to our next opening segment here called Nerd Hour. It doesn't take an hour, but sometimes we spend hours doing nerdy things, right? And I guess I'll start with this one. So I've been so busy lately getting newsletters for the show set up and websites updated. I've been doing a lot of, I guess, not architecture work, but just organizational work for the show and associated content, right? That said, I have also been prepping to go to InfoSecurity Europe here very soon. I've got a speaking session there, and plus I'm manning the company's booth while I'm there. I always take a couple of devices with me, sometimes too many, and then I find that, hey, my backpack is really, really heavy. Like, I don't want to carry this around anymore. So this time I'm trying to go with less. And I normally travel with 2 laptops. I'm just going to go with 1 laptop, my thinnest and lightest, and my iPad, and that's it. And so my primary kind of content creation workflow, I do everything in Markdown, and I utilize private GitHub repos to host my content, right? And I have yet to find a good solution on iPad that allows me to both author in Markdown and upload to GitHub. You can find tools that do one or the other, but not one that does both. And so right now what I'm thinking is I have several Linux boxes in the house, and I have been known to just use Git at the command line and then use Vim for my Markdown editing. At the very least, I can use Tailscale, which is how it's an overlay network that allows me to get back into my house when I'm remote. I'll just, SSH into one of my Linux boxes and just use Vim and Git from the command line. That's my plan. I don't know what it is. My plan D at this point or whatever, but that's kind of the stuff I've been tinkering with lately. How about you, Paul?
Wow. Well, we did say it's good to have different perspectives. I would rather, I think, put my nuts in a vice than do the workflow you just described. I think that would be absolutely horrific.
I might be overcomplicating it.
It's a really good content creator for text. It works really well.
I might be overcomplicating it just a little bit.
I think so, mate. I think it's a little bit overcomplicated.
I will have
my OneDrive, and it works.
I will have my MacBook with me, so I'll have VS Code, and I can do everything with that. But I don't always want to get my MacBook out, right? Sometimes I just have an idea to jot down or something. But yes, agreed. I probably make it more complicated than it needs to be. But I'm a sucker for Markdown and Git repos. What can I say?
Well, each to their own. Each to their own. As long as you produce the content, that I think anybody's wanting. So my nerd news are a little bit simpler, a little bit different. I really just want to mention I'm a Surface guy. I love my Surface devices. I've had, I think, basically every single one Microsoft has ever released. So in the normal sized things, not a Surface Studio or anything. But anyway, I've had a Surface Book and a Surface Laptop Studio, and I just want to mention to folks, if you haven't kept up with the changes, so you probably know that Intel has been struggling over the last couple of years, really, and they're feeling a fair bit of competition from Qualcomm. And Qualcomm, of course, have gone on to great lengths or great success with their ARM processors, which you find in all your smartphones and tablets and things. But it's now, over the last, say, 2 or 3 years, they have expanded widely into computers. And of course, some of the newer Surface Pro, what Microsoft calls a Copilot Plus PC, they come with ARM processors. So I have a Surface Pro 11, I suppose it is, the latest generation, that's built on a Qualcomm. And I love this thing. It is amazing. There is a fan in there, but I never hear it, even when I'm going full pelt. Like it, if I really lean down, I can hear that there is a fan in there, but I wouldn't notice it if I didn't know it was there. It's amazingly fast, amazingly efficient. It's got a nice GPU built in, which I don't do gaming, so I don't need it to be anything super powerful. And it's got an NPU, like a neural processing unit, the AI processor in there, so you can run your AI models locally if they're small enough to fit into your memory. And the particular model I have is 64 gigs of RAM, so I'm very, very happy with it. And I think somebody was saying, and I tend to agree, I think this is probably the last time I buy an Intel-based laptop ever. I think the game has been won, and it's even to the point where I'm thinking one of my education clients, when they get teacher laptops and even student laptops, I think they're now so compatible and they work so well on the Windows side that I might suggest to them that instead of getting AMD or Intel based laptops, they get ARM based ones for their next purchase.
Yeah, when I switched over to Mac, a lot of people were like, Andy, you've always been a Windows guy, right? And what I said was, okay, I'm not Apple fanboying here, but I'm a huge fan of ARM processors. And that was at the time when they just came out with the M series chips, Apple's own ARM based chip. And I remember I replaced a fairly beefy ThinkPad that was my daily driver before that. And this thing had, a nice NVIDIA GPU in it, pretty decent Intel chip. And I mean, you looked at that thing sideways and the fans would spin up and sound like a jet engine, And then here's my, I kind of test drove the Mac ecosystem. I just got one of the little tiny Mac minis, the entry level, like the cheapest one I could get. And it ran circles around that ThinkPad. I was amazed. And it generated practically no heat. So same thing, you could never hear the fan actually spin. I'm not even sure that model had a fan because it was just so, just so heat efficient. But absolutely, I'm a huge fan of ARM architectures. And at some point, I'm going to have to get your thoughts on Microsoft Recall, because there's some very, how do I want to put it? There's some very strong opinions about Recall in the community. And my plan is to have my good friend Simon Binder on. He is I don't remember exactly. I think he's a Office Services Microsoft MVP. But he has been doing a lot around Recall lately. I'd love to get his take as well too, because it's a divisive topic. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, as I think I might have mentioned in one of the latest recordings when we did this, I have it enabled on that particular device I was just talking about now.
yeah.
And it's been on for a few weeks, so I can tell you the good and the bad and the ugly.
We'll have to get into it. I think we've come up with, I don't know, 2 or 3 podcast episodes here, ideas. So anyway, I think it's about time we get to today's main segment. And again, we are answering the question today of what makes a great sysadmin. And I think it's important that we start by talking about why we're having this discussion. And I feel like the role of the sysadmin has been around for so long that I think there's been multiple iterations of what makes a great sysadmin, because obviously the role changes with the industry, the times, the technology, right? But there's a couple of things that I think transcends all of those different things, right? That are consistent across, the entire span of computing. And so I feel like the reasons we're having this episode is, one, it's important to define what those traits are so that we can kind of do a sanity check on ourselves. Like, hey, am I doing all the right things? Do I have knowledge gaps? Could I maybe do something better? Right. And I think the other thing here that I really want to highlight is that this is our opinion, mine and Paul's opinion, right? Uh, but we're interested in your opinion as well, too. And of course, I've said this on just about every episode. You can always email us at contact@sysadminweekly.com. And, if you've got a comment that you'd like to be read on the show, PG-13 friendly, by the way. Um, but I'd certainly love to hear all of your opinions. And yeah, so I see this episode as being for aspiring sysadmins, people that are maybe pivoting in their career, and then, IT veterans that are, just doing self-checks. I feel like I do self-checks way too often, but um
I think it's a good idea.
yeah, so what do you think, Paul? I think maybe we start with mindset and
Yeah.
overall philosophy, because I think that sysadmins need to have kind of a core mindset, right? And the first one that comes to mind for me is like, okay, we're problem solvers, right? I think
Yes.
you come into the office in the morning, or your virtual office, right? And a lot of us are doing projects, or that are solving a business problem, or maybe you're on a help desk and you're going through tickets, or you work for an MSP and you're going through tickets, right? But we're all solving problems. And so I
Yeah.
think that's one important trait for sysadmins. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that, Paul.
No, I'll just make the comment here. So I was a teacher at the local trade college, I suppose you'd call it in US terms, for 20 years part time, and I was teaching, aspiring sysadmins essentially. So from that point of view, I agree. We did a lot of troubleshooting, and I did talk a lot about troubleshooting. And as you mentioned, I think the other thing, or the other thing that I can think of, is owning the systems. I think that's another thing that might have gone away a little bit, because it's also virtual now and lives in the
Right.
cloud and it's SaaS and whatever. Like when it was, and for those young folks in the audience, once upon a time when it was all on premises, like you could literally own the system, right? Like
Oh
the
yeah.
network was yours, like you ran it, right? Apart from a few people VPNing in from home, it was all the network you controlled. You controlled all the physical servers, you controlled all the virtualization hosts, and you controlled all the workloads and everything. Like it was under your control. And the benefit of that was, of course, that you could own it. You could literally say, well, if there's a problem here, we are responsible for it and we're going to fix it. Nowadays, I think that's gone away a little bit. And I think that's a problem. And I think it's very important that when you are a sysadmin and you have an area of responsibility, even if that includes SaaS apps and things that aren't something you can go and touch and say, this is under my control, you still have to own that system, in the sense that when people say, hey, there's a problem, you need to find out what the vendor is saying. Like, I don't know, gee, Google Workspace is having a down issue here, and then you can tell your users about it. Yeah. So I think that ownership is important.
Agreed. And the point about the cloud changing kind of that part of the mentality of the sysadmin mindset is absolutely true, because it's easy to throw your hands up and, oh well, Azure Central US is offline, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. That said, Microsoft provides, and not just Microsoft, but every major cloud provider provides all kinds of redundancies that you can choose to use, right? Failover sites. That's a whole other episode there too. That's going to be the running joke for this episode, is all the different episode ideas we came up with. But I think there's some ownership there as well too, in that, yes, even though my workloads are living in someone else's data center, that vendor provides me some tools to give me some ownership over things like failover and redundancy, right? So
Yeah.
I love that ownership mentality. And it used to be, and I'm sure in some circles it's still like this, it used to be people would hold up uptime as a badge of honor, right? Hey, look, this Debian system I have has been up for a year, and well, it's a little different these days because we have, critical security patches that need to be applied, and, things that require at least a kernel reboot. But my point is I think at some point we lost that pride of uptime.
Mm.
The inverse of that is, okay, when things do go down, you have to take ownership of that as well too.
Yeah.
And there's a sidebar here about providing value to the business, but we're going to get
Mhm.
back to that here a little bit later. I have
Mhm.
a separate note specifically for that. Uh, and then I think about, again, the cloud, how things have changed since I got into the sysadmin thing. But I think now your modern day sysadmin has to have a bias towards automation and efficiency.
Yep.
I Departments are being asked to do more with less, right?
Yep.
And it used to be some people would be afraid to automate things because, oh, I'm going to automate myself out of a job. But no, my stance has always been, hey, let me automate the mundane, boring, repetitive things. That way I can focus on more strategic issues within the business, right? And
Yep.
so I think there definitely needs to be a bias towards automation and efficiency. I
Absolutely.
suspect you probably agree with that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. As running my own small MSP here, I completely agree. I do want to make one caution though. At least younger sysadmins sometimes thinks that automation is a solution in itself, right? Like they realize they're doing some task or something on a regular basis, and they go, "Oh, we're going to automate this," and they put together a script or they get some sort of automation tool that does it for them, and then they forget about it, and that is not something you can do in IT, right? Like
Yeah,
there's a lot of fragile automations out there that work fine as long as 10 different interdependencies are working at the same time. But as soon as one of those things break, other things break, and then all of a sudden you have this system where nothing is working properly.
right.
Classic example here is an ex-client of mine many years ago. I come in the very first time I meet them, as a prospect, I'm talking to them. Yeah, do you do backups of your server? This was back in the server days. Yeah, yeah, we do backups of the receptionist was very proud that she changed the tapes every day.
Oh
And I
no.
sit down and I check the server and I have a look at it, and the backups have not been running successfully for the last 9 months. But they had no idea because they had never been taught how to look for anything. She literally just took a tape out, put another tape in, and did that every day, and was very proud of the fact that she did it. That there wasn't any data on those tapes, they had no idea.
Oh,
So if you're automating backups, you need to have monitoring that tells you whether
yeah,
the things are running or not. If you're automating updates, you need to have reports and monitoring so you understand whether they actually got updated or not. You need to have the monitoring in place so that you know what's happening in your environment.
for sure. I mean, I did this personally myself with my home lab here recently. I had some I I don't want to say old hardware, but older hardware lying around that I wasn't using. And I needed some storage space for some projects that I'm working on. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to spin up this system. It's, 6, 7 years old. It's got, I think, 6 1 terabyte drives in it. I'm like, okay, these things, they're old for spinning disks, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to set this up as a RAID 6, so I can tolerate 2 drive failures. But I want both smart monitoring running on this. So I want predictive failure alerts. And then I want to actually know when this RAID array degrades for some reason. And so I don't know, I spent the better part of an afternoon getting email alerts set up on a system that lives in my basement, right? And so same thing applies to production systems. Like you said, I think that it's so important to have that monitoring in place. And there's something to be said here about proper documentation too, but we're gonna get to that too. So
Yep.
uh so we've talked about mindset and philosophy. I think the next area to touch on would be technical skill sets. And when you think about the question like what makes a great sysadmin, a lot of people go straight to the technical skill set. And don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
that's a huge part of it, but it's not the only part of it.
Definitely not.
And so the first thing I want to call out here is if you don't like to learn new things, you're in the wrong field.
Yep.
And I have to call out Jeffrey Snover. He's a great guy. Everybody knows him as Mr. PowerShell. He's often credited as one of the core people that created PowerShell at Microsoft. I did an interview with him one time, um, and I was talking with him, on camera. And I told him, I'm like, hey, everybody knows you as Mr. PowerShell. What do you think about that? I don't remember what the question was. And he said something that I still remember to this day. He's like, Andy, yeah, I'm known for creating PowerShell, but I was one of the 3 chief architects of Windows Server. He's like, that's something you put on your tombstone. And I'm like, okay, yes, agreed. Anyway, he said something in one of his sessions about learning. He said that if you don't like learning, you should go be a lumberjack, because that profession is by and large the same as it's been for it's the same as it's been for the last 100 years, right? And so I often think about Jeffrey Snover when I get into the whole learning and IT discussion. So,
Yeah,
but he's right.
he's absolutely right. And it is super, super, super important. And it is one of the things I always stressed with my students as well. You really do need to keep learning. And I don't just mean, maybe your business runs all on Linux, so you want to learn as much as you can about Linux and you're studying different areas of Linux or whatever, or you're running all in AWS, so you've got to focus on AWS, whatever it is. That's sort of a given, right?
Yeah.
And even if you're working for somebody else, don't assume that they are going to teach you. You're going to have to learn that. You're just going to have to put aside time to do that. But I also mean be generally interested in IT.
Yeah.
Now, this could be one of my biases. We talked initially about how our backgrounds, shape how we see things. But because I work in small business, I tend to get questions about everything under the sun. Right now, obviously, I'm not an expert in everything under the sun to do with technology, but I have a bit of an idea, and I'm curious. And I'm curious to learn about how technology is affecting society, how it's affecting education, because one of my clients is education, and I'm a trainer. How is it affecting other things? And if an article comes up and I read that, I'm not expecting that I'm going to use that tomorrow in my job, but it gives me an overall background and understanding of how technology works. And I think one of the things that gives me is that when I read articles like the ones about the license plate readers I was mentioning earlier, I can sort of see more what's happening to society as it becomes more and more digitalized. And I can understand it more than most people because I understand how the technology works. I'm not an expert in exactly how Facebook does their data mining, but I understand enough about it to know that we are handing over a lot of our data, back to that privacy thing again. And the things they can do with that data is properly scary. So that's why I think it's important to have that curiosity.
For sure. For sure. I think that's, at a high level, that's super important. But when you get down to the micro, like actually working with the technology, that's important there too, because, I think about, I think you and I talked about this in the Microsoft certification episode about doing labs.
Yeah.
How now Microsoft has it set up to where basically it might as well be like a slideshow that you're just clicking through, right? Well, okay, you're going to do this in Azure. Go here, click this, go here, click this, go here, click this. Me, I'm the guy that sits in the lab and I'm like, hey, what's this button over here do? Oh, what's this do? Hey, does this break if I do this over here? Like I want to be able to do those things because that's how I personally learn best, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, well, if I do the system this way, it breaks, and oh, that's why we're not supposed to configure it this way because, oh, whoops, I don't know, I hosed the clustered share volume in this Windows cluster, right? Whoops. Thankfully, it was in a lab and not a production environment, right? And so you kind of have to have that curiosity to facilitate that learning, I think. And that's maybe one of my biases, but I feel like that's very important.
Yes, I think that's really, really important too.
So when we talk about learning, there's certainly some core things that I think are important. Things like OS fundamentals, networking. I think those are 2 things that you should have at least a general working knowledge about. I'm not saying you need to know exactly how, TCP IP works down at, the bit level or anything, but you should understand, how subnets work and the OSI model, that type of thing, right?
OS fundamentals for, and some people are probably going to yell at me, but in my opinion, you should know OS fundamentals for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Linux runs a vast majority of the world's server infrastructure, right? So, and most Linux servers are CLI only, right? So you need to know some basic Linux commands, and it's just useful to know in general. Scripting, cloud technologies, of course, Microsoft 365. I feel like sysadmins are the proverbial Swiss Army knife of
Yeah,
technology, right? We need to know a little bit about a lot of different things. You
yeah,
can certainly have your specialization areas, but again, you kind of you have to be well-rounded, right?
yes, I completely agree.
So now the other area along with that, I haven't mentioned it yet on purpose because it's important enough to be its own line item in my outline here. And some sysadmins will be happy about this, some won't be. It depends on, some people agree with this, some people don't. I think security is mandatory now for everybody.
Yeah,
There's every sysadmin needs to have a basic understanding of security. And I think a great certification for that is Security Plus. I don't work for CompTIA or anything, just FYI. But the thing I like about that particular certification, we talk about being really well-rounded as a sysadmin. That certification goes, a mile wide and an inch deep
mhm,
on the security topic. It gives you enough to where you can at least start asking the questions and analyzing the risk profile for a given situation, and it changes how you think about deployments and configurations.
mhm.
You spin up a new file server and you start putting files on it, and you'll find yourself stopping and thinking, okay, well, what if a malicious actor or an insider threat did this, or they did this? What's the risk? You start thinking about risk in your day-to-day activity and how to mitigate that. And, that helps save your organization from a big problem, but it also, selfishly makes you the hero of the story as well, right? So I don't
Yeah,
think security is optional anymore. Everybody is a security admin in some way, shape, or form.
I think so too. And I think, there's probably been, if we have some listeners who work in really, really big organizations, sometimes in the past they could probably say, well, I work in X part of the IT department, and there's another security over team over there, and they do security, and I don't
Right.
have to worry about it. That is not true anymore. It's literally, even if you're in a large or a small business, as evidenced by example by Microsoft's Secure Future initiative, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
every employee at Microsoft, one of the things they are measured every year on their performance evaluations is how did you contribute to security. So like that's everybody, and that's the same here, I think, for everybody who's a sysadmin who's got some responsibility for a system. um, you just can't think that it's somebody else's problem anymore, because there's so many. I think what's changed, and this is what's sort of forcing the IT industry to grow up in some ways, because we're still a very young industry, right? Like if you
Right.
compare to other professional spaces, like, I don't know, doctors or lawyers or something, they've been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So they have a very sort of established pattern of how you get to call yourself that. Whereas in our industry, Joe Blow can hang up his shingle and say, I'm a sysadmin, like I did a
Very
course
true.
on the weekend, I'm good to go, you know what I mean? So we don't really have that same professionality, but I think it's being forced upon us now, or it's happening because it has to overall, because society in general and businesses are now so reliant on technology. I know when I started with some of my clients 25 years ago, they literally had non-computer based systems to fall back on. Like if they had a downtime, they could get by for a few hours without the whole thing breaking down. Today,
Huh.
if IT systems are down, like the whole thing just grinds to a halt depending on what system it is. So from a cybersecurity point of view, we really do need to take this seriously, because it's everybody's responsibility, as you said.
Sure. Yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of forcing us to grow up, right? So,
Yeah.
well, I also want to touch on soft skills here, Paul. But before we
Mhm.
get to that, knowing that you have a gajillion certifications yourself, and you're also a Microsoft certified trainer. You and I actually just did an episode 2 or 3 episodes ago about Microsoft certification. But if you put your Microsoft certified trainer hat on, your trainer hat on, we've probably covered most of this already. But is there any last bits of wisdom we haven't discussed yet? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
The equivalent of the Security Plus, which I agree is a good certification, in the Microsoft world, that would be the SC900.
Yep.
So they have a series of fundamentals exams, and you could take a training, and then you can do a certification exam. They're sort of lower cost than the what I call the real exams, the real certifications, and they're sort of designed for the non-technical people in the organization. The way I see that is somebody who's in sales and selling security technologies,
Oh, yeah.
or somebody who's in marketing and selling security technologies. They're a great candidate to do the SC900 because it tells you how it works, but not how you do it to make it happen. Whereas the more real certifications, that the sort of technical, I'm a SysAdmin and I'm going to be a SOC engineer or something, that's an SC200 exam, for example. And that's something where you learn how to actually do the technical steps, not just what it can do for you, sort of thing. So that would probably be the one there. Otherwise, yeah, just go back to the certification episode we had. I do think, and there are a few holdouts who say, "Oh, I don't need certification. I got experience. That should count for everything." No, because training for a certification exam forces you to cover the entire gamut. And no matter what your experience is, in most cases, you're going to be working very much in 70 or 80% of a product, but you're not going to touch the other 20% because it's not something that you need to as part of your job. But to prepare for a certification exam, you have to touch that area and learn those things. And that makes you a better all-around sysadmin.
It does. And everybody has knowledge gaps. I'll sit down and start, I don't know, looking at a blog post about a certain topic. And it's like, oh yeah, that little piece of this topic I've never done anything with. Let's go learn about that. And that's the nice thing about certification is it helps you fill those knowledge gaps. And when I'm configuring something or setting up something new, having that broad knowledge enables me to make maybe different decisions than I would make had I not had that knowledge, right? And hopefully save myself some pain later on down the line. So, well, when we talk about soft skills, we've talked about technical skills so far. We've talked about some traits already. But when we talk about soft skills, it used to be that there was the stereotype about IT people that, they're these nerdy people that sit on computers in a closet downstairs and they don't ever talk to anyone. That is not the case by any stretch of the imagination anymore. I'm not even convinced that was ever the case. Maybe it was the popular media's depiction of computer people, right? But
I think so too. I think it was the old classic, lock them in the basement and slide pizza under the door once a day. That was the joke. But yeah, no, that's not a thing.
keep your sysadmin fed, folks. All right,
Mhm.
pizza under the door. But soft skills are so important. And, we could spend a while on this, but I kind of want to focus on a few key areas. Communication, presentation, and storytelling skills are all
Mhm.
really important. And people ask me, like, why? There's a couple of reasons why, right? Because we all have to communicate in our day-to-day lives, both personally and professionally. Communication, you can never have enough communication skills, in my opinion. When I talk about presentation and storytelling skills, though, people always look at me funny, like, really? I don't do public speaking. I don't need to tell stories. Well, here's the thing. I say this through the lens of all the layoffs that have been happening in the tech industry lately. And that is, I feel like historically, sysadmins have been rather bad at conveying their value to an organization. And so you always hear this, it's often joked about, but there's an air of truth to it. You know, people walk by the IT department and, what do you guys even do around here? You know, and they say that whether things are running perfectly or whether things are broken, right?
Yep.
It's because people don't understand what IT does. And so I think it's really important for sysadmins to be able to convey the value of themselves and their team to leadership. That way, you know, should the layoff word start getting thrown around, hopefully you're not on the chopping block because of that, right? But I think it's good just to showcase the value overall.
Yeah, absolutely. There is 100% with you there. A couple of other things that I would mention here. The first one, as I always used to tell my students, uh, translating geek into English is super important, or
Yes.
language of your choice if English isn't your first language. This is super, 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 super important. I always said to my students, the day you can explain what you do to your granny and she actually understands what you do, that's the day you know how to translate properly. That is, and obviously as a certified trainer, this is one of the skills that I have honed over the years. Whenever I talk to my clients and they ask me anything about technology, I always break it down so that they can understand what I'm talking about. I
Yep.
use analogies, I use simple words, I use ways of conveying what's happening, and it's not dumbing it down. That's often what people say, oh, you're dumbing it down for them. No, they are experts in their areas,
Yeah.
whether it's being a top accountant or a top educator or a top principal at a school. They have skills and insights and knowledge that I don't have and won't
Yep.
ever have because I'm not in those roles. They're not dumber than I am. They're not smarter than I am. They're just in a different field. So if they were explaining, if one of my accountancy clients were explaining something intricate about accounting, if he used all the jargon and assumed a lot of knowledge on my behalf, I would be completely lost within 5 seconds. You know, like I know the basics of accounting, but I'm not an accounting expert. And this is the same thing. So don't think just because you understand the technology that you're smarter than other people. You just need to translate it for them. And that then helps communicating the value, because that is so important, whether you're like me, you're a hired sysadmin as an MSP, so to speak, right? A hired sysadmin for hire, I suppose you could call it an MSP, or you're working at a company. But it's really, really important to be able to convey that value. And remember, IT is there to improve the business.
Yes.
Right? The old jokes about this job would be so much better if we didn't have any users, or this job would be so much better if we didn't have to deal with the stupid business managers. You know what I mean? That's not how it flies anymore, because you are there for the business. And if you don't do your job, the business isn't going to run well. So that's why you're there.
Very much so. Very much so. The other thing I want to mention here before we move on to kind of our wrap up here, documentation. Documentation. Every sysadmin's favorite thing to do, and every developer's favorite thing to do too, right? And
Absolutely.
documentation.
Can't
So
wait.
I learned this very early in my career, in that I don't even remember what it was now. I configured something on an old Windows 2K server, some third-party app, something to do with like a student grade database or something. I don't even remember. Anyway, I took the time to learn what I needed to do to get this thing set up and running, right? And of course, 6 months went by and it broke. And I came back and sat down in front of this application, and I was like Gandalf in Fellowship of the Rings. I have no memory of this place. And so, had I taken the time to properly document things, I, would have been more happy with past Andy, but that wasn't the case. And so, I guess now I always jokingly ask myself the question, and it's not really a joke, there's some truth to it. If I am on a technical team and I am building something out, okay, have I documented this? And have I documented it in such a way that future Andy and or Andy's teammates are not going to hate him when they read this, right?
Yeah.
So, because we've all seen the documentation that, okay, cool, there was some documentation, but I read it and it means nothing, right?
Mhm.
Right? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that about the documentation as well.
I think that's really, really important. And as an MSP, it's one of my jobs, right, to make sure,
Yes.
because you may not, like if you want to be really harsh about it, I may not be there next year and somebody else might be taking over my role. That's number one. But also, certainly agreeing with you and future Andy, it's the same thing for me. I can't remember what I did last week. There's no way I would remember technical details if I don't have them documented. So,
And you'll thank yourself later. And
Mhm.
I can't explain how weird it is when you go out to Google and you're Googling a problem, and in one of the top 5 results, there's a blog post of yours. That
Yeah,
happened to me. I Google something and I'm like, wait, that's my website. Oh, I apparently have solved this problem before, and it's really strange, but it speaks to the value of good documentation. Anyway,
absolutely.
so I have a section here written down for key traits, Paul, but I think we've talked about a lot of these traits already throughout the episode so far. Curiosity, we've talked about. I think we've touched on grit. It's not easy being a sysadmin, so you do have to have some of that grace under pressure, right? Kind of a given. Um, this third one I have written down here, I feel like is very important. Um, a willingness to say, I don't know. I have seen so many sysadmins, and I've caught myself going through this
Mhm.
thought process at certain times in the recent past, where somebody asked me a question, and I'm the guy that's supposed to know it all, right? I have to provide a question. It's okay to say I don't know, because you know what? This industry has become so vast. There are so many subspecializations, so many different areas. It is impossible to know it all.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's 100%. And you imagine the pressure you have. Imagine being a Microsoft certified trainers. You're delivering training to Microsoft partners, technological experts in a particular area, and being an MSP who has to deal with clients who come to you expecting you to be the expert for everything. And the temptation to go, oh, yeah, yeah, I know the answer. I'll make up some bullshit on the spot. No, no, it's really hard, but you do need to own that and say, look, that's not the area that I work in normally. I've got a vague idea, but I'm going to have to get back to you on it and research it and find out the
Yeah.
technical details. The last one I want to put a point on there is empathy. I think that's really, really important, because the grace under fire tends to come very much from users who are frustrated. Right? People get
Yes.
frustrated with technology and they take it out on IT. Why is this bloody well never working? You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
sort of frustration. It's certainly if you start in help desk, as many of us do, right, and you take you're the entry level guy who gets all the calls, right, and you're trying to figure out why somebody can't print or something and they're frustrated and they're under time pressure. Being unable to understand that this for a lot of our users, and I'm thinking in particular about my education client, there are teachers there that really really don't have a lot of technical knowledge, right? And I deliver regular training to them 3 or 4 times a year. I come to the school and they have an hour with me and we go through all sorts of technical things, but it's not their area of expertise. But when they get frustrated by things not working properly, understanding that frustration, that they don't understand how the technology works, so for them it is frustrating, and
Right.
that's what you're hearing from them, and having the empathy. Oh, I got to mention the classic one here. This was not me, but it was another MSP on the Sunshine Coast here in Australia where I live, and we had a guy from that company come and talk to us, and they had empathy training after this session for everybody who works at that MSP. There were
Oh
25
no.
people or something at the time. Help desk comes in, somebody calls from out in the boonies, meaning way outside of populated areas in Australia. They
Yep.
have a poor internet connection, and the call goes like this. Help desk, how can I help you? I'm so and so from this company. I'm in this location, and my internet is really slow. Where were you again? Yeah, so and so location. Well, that's your problem then. hang up.
No.
Because technically the answer is you're living in the boonies, you can't get any better internet. But that is not the answer you give to somebody and hang up on them, right? You cannot
Right.
do that, right? So you have to understand. So they literally brought in an empathy expert to this company to train everybody, including all the people on the help desk. That's not how you train people.
Oh boy. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Oh.
Yeah, it's because you're out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Get better internet. Oh, sorry, I can't. Can I speak with your supervisor, please?
Exactly.
Anyway. Well, I think the thing I want to kind of end with here, Paul, is career growth. And we've mentioned a lot of what I have written down already as we've stepped through, but to just kind of put a point on it, I think continuous learning is something that every sysadmin needs to do. And that's not just technical learning, but that's soft skills. Um, I think having an active mindset of how can I be a better sysadmin as you go through your day to day will certainly help you figure out what do I need to go learn next, right? And of course, you want to have your news sites that you continue to look at, your Discord communities, useful stuff on GitHub, Stack Overflow if you're a developer, for example, or the SysAdmin Weekly newsletter, which I mentioned an episode or two ago is now live. That's newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. I have to plug it whenever I can, right?
Well done.
But that's an example, right? We curate a bunch of useful sysadmin related content that you can use to go and keep your saws sharp, right? And this last area is something I started doing about 12 years ago now. I remember back in 2013. No, I take that back. 13 years ago, 2012, I made it a point to start doing public speaking, start training my colleagues, start doing blog posts, and sharing that knowledge that I had accumulated over my career up until that point. And you know what I found out? You very quickly identify your knowledge gaps, and it enables you to go learn more about a specific topic. At least that's what I've found. Paul, you can speak to that more as a trainer, but that was my personal experience.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Somebody told me many, many decades ago now. They said the best way to learn from a course is to deliver it. Right, and
Yep.
that's really true. If you're going to deliver something, that's absolutely true. I do also want to point out here a couple of things. First one, most people don't realize it about me, but I'm a massive introvert. There is an excellent book, Susan Cain, The Power of Quiet in a World That Won't Shut Up. Have a read of that book. It's a really interesting book. That's where I found out I was an introvert. She has a 20 question questionnaire, and then you get points on each question, right? And I am 18 out of 20 on that questionnaire. So I'm
Wow.
very, very introvert. Most people don't know that. When I was in high school, my absolute worst nightmare would be to stand in front of the class and talk about anything. I literally wanted to hide under the floor if I could. And now I love it. I love being a trainer. I love being in front of people. I love sharing my knowledge, whether that's through a podcast like this, or in a webinar, or in a live training, or through a blog post or an article I write, and I share it that way.
Right.
And I think that is super, super, super important. Many times people find themselves in, say, a sysadmin role, and maybe they have some colleagues, maybe they don't, but they find that they think they're alone, and that's not true.
Yeah.
But coming back to the whole point of this podcast, right, and the organization behind it, is we want to help people who want to become sysadmins, not developers necessarily, but sysadmins. And you are part of a community. There is a community out there for you. Might take a little bit of time to find it. Sometimes, you have to go to meetups in your local area or something like that. But sometimes it's a virtual, online community that can really, really help you. And being part of those communities, as you said before, nobody can be an expert in everything. That's where you hopefully find those people, and they can point you to the right resources in areas where you don't have the expertise yet.
For sure. And that's something my dad always used to say when I was growing up. And I was always like, Dad, that's That sounds weird. I was a teenager, and you know how teenagers are. But it's true. He used to say, Andy, it's not that you need to know everything. It's that you should know where to get the answer. That's the important part, right? And so, yeah, the community is a massively important thing. In fact, we keep joking about this should be an episode. I already have a importance of community for the SysAdmin episode planned. I haven't recorded it yet, but it's coming. But yeah, if I have a really hardcore storage issue I've come across, I know who I go to talk to. When there's a PowerShell or automation question I don't know the answer to, I've got my guy, So again, that community just makes us all better, right? So, well, Paul, I think we're about wrapped on this one. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come and talk to us. I think it's Saturday morning for you, so I appreciate you spending some time with us on a Saturday morning.
I appreciate you taking a Friday evening to talk to me.
No worries. I mean, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be, I don't know, playing StarCraft or something. But anyway. So I appreciate you spending some time with us. So folks, appreciate you spending some time with us as well too. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, you can watch us out on YouTube. We have audio versions of the podcast available out on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And again, I'm going to plug it again, the news companion newsletter to the show, newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And that all said, I recently updated sysadminweekly.com as well too, www.sysadminweekly.com. That includes links to all the different platforms as well as a newsletter. So be sure to check us out there. So other than that, appreciate you spending some time with us. Hope you have a good rest of the week, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.